My name is Alexandra Levin Kramer. I'm a partner at CKR Law in the New York office. We are a global law firm with offices or affiliated offices of over 40 around the world, including some key jurisdictions for the blockchain industry, that is Hong Kong, Singapore, Switzerland, and of course New York. Having said that, I would like to get started. I'd like to leave some time for questions later on as well. So let me just introduce briefly our panelists. Immediately to my right is ECU, co-founder and CMO at Moeda. Next is Michael Maloney, litigation partner at CKR Law and head of our litigation practice, as well as a member of our Blockchain Technology Taskforce. And let me just add, for those who have concerns about what's going on in China, whether you've invested or plan to invest or are a startup there, CKR Law has a Blockchain Technology Taskforce which provides a global and full-service solution to help investors and companies in the blockchain industry mitigate the risk of, as well as navigate the defense of litigation and regulatory actions facing them or those with whom they may be affiliated. Members of this task force at our firm include our global experts in securities and corporate governance, as well as our litigators. Our global team is experienced in advising and defending our clients in all types of legal matters, proceedings, arbitrations, and government actions in the US and abroad. In addition to our blockchain task force, we also serve traditional clients such as startups, investors, exchanges, technology companies, in different industries, real estate, healthcare, finance, banking, etc. To the right of Michael is Elaine Yi, founding partner of Zonvon Ventures and co-organizer of the Chinese Blockchain Investors Meetup Group. And finally, but not least importantly, is Jeff Rinde, managing partner of CKR Law. Welcome, and thank you for all attending. If you wouldn't mind, perhaps, Jeff, you could start just giving a brief introduction to yourself in terms of what you've been doing in China or blockchain or both.
I've been doing business in China for over 20 years. For the last decade, I've been spending more than 6 months a year in China. I lived in China for a good portion of that. In China, I do everything from inbound and outbound M&A, securities work, which of course crosses over into blockchain, and I've been overseeing the opening of our office in Beijing, a new office in Shenzhen, and also have spent quite a bit of time in Hong Kong.
So my name is Yi Li, very simple, and you can call me Elaine as well. I graduated from Tsinghua University in Beijing many years ago and have been focusing on artificial intelligence for 7 years there. You know, just like iPhone X for the facial recognition, so I co-author and I was the first author in 2005 in a very top conference published there. But later I came here to New York for my overseas studies in Columbia University. And after my graduation, luckily in around 2008 in the crisis, I was finally hired by Wall Street. So I worked on Wall Street for a couple years there, most likely on the buy side. And later I resigned from my previous employer, Morgan Stanley Investment Management. I started my firm. It's called Zonvon, cross-border financial services. We do a little bit innovation in the investment field by our branch called Zonvon Ventures, and one of our focus is fintech. So blockchain is our favorite. That's why I'm here. And thanks for the CKR for the invitation, and happy to share.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Michael Maloney. I'm a litigator at CKR. You're probably wondering why, as a litigator on a blockchain panel, sitting before you here today. Part of what I do is what you would expect a litigation attorney to do, to tell their clients what they can't do, what they should not do. The judge is going to rule against you, all that sort of fun stuff. But another part of what I do is to help my clients take a step back from their ordinary business operations and think about the things that they could change about their business that would help them survive a litigation if it comes up in the future, to survive some sort of regulatory enforcement action, and to survive this difficult environment that we face nowadays when you're operating across borders in multiple jurisdictions.
Hey, my name is Isa, and I want to say thank you to Alexandra and CKR Law for setting this panel up. I'm co-founder and CMO at Moeda. It is a blockchain startup, and we raised $20 million through ICO, and we are the last ICO in China. We end the ICO at the end of this August. Prior to Moeda, I've been in blockchain for about 4 years. Starting from fresh out of school, I trade all the cryptos, and we have a hedge fund set in Cayman, investing in all the crypto startups from payments to remittance to ICOs and all the stuff. Yeah, I would love to share anything I know about ICO, about China market to everyone.
Thank you. So Isa, perhaps we'll start with you, given, at 4 years in, you're basically a veteran of the industry. Could you talk about the history of blockchain technology in China for a bit?
Well, the history in China, actually, we all know Bitcoin started as a paper in late 2008, and people started to mine Bitcoin in 2009, and exchanges started to come out 2009, 2010. I don't know the exactly time, but there are about 3 or 4. There are about 3 or 4 very big Bitcoin exchanges coming in China, and once during 2012, 2013, 14, China was the biggest crypto trading market. About 80% to 90% trading volume coming from China. We all know BTC, Singapore, OKCoin, all the big exchanges. And then the ICO came up in 2013. I believe it was summer in 2013. The first ICO was called Mastercoin, and they raised about 6,000 Bitcoin. At that time, it was about $5 million, but they didn't run long. And then other ICOs coming up. We all know the Ethereum in 2014. Then the first Chinese ICO was called ANT, and now they changed the name to NEO. They raised funds 2016 in August to September. I think they raised about $5 million, and one NEO was about 5 cents yuan at that time. And 1 year later now, one NEO, I checked the price this morning, it is about $28.48. That's about 184 Chinese yuan. So it's about 3,700 times in 1 year. So the whole market is very crazy after all the ICOs happening in 2016. That's to the highest point, 2017 summer. And then it was called down by the government in September. That's the basic history of Bitcoin trading and ICO market in China.
Elaine, perhaps you could comment on, there seems to be a dichotomy between the support locally of the technology itself versus at the higher government level of token sales, et cetera. We'll talk about the ban momentarily, but could you talk about this dichotomy? It doesn't seem to be consistent in terms of what we hear on the ground.
Okay, sure. I forgot to mention, actually, we run a meetup as well. It's called Chinese Blockchain Investors, locally in New York City. And from our establishment, we have already presented the very top ones teams from China. They call OKCoin, as well as Huobi, and also NEO, which is just mentioned. Very interesting why they came here, because mainly because of the ban in China, right? They have to move overseas in Japan, Singapore, like New York City, or even Silicon Valley as well. And also my background, I came from the Main Street, and also very core technology in artificial intelligence. It's very related to the intelligent or smart contract, right? So I can, and from our learning is that, so in China, the general economy is changing from the very center very for the human being, for the labor centered to consumption, consumer focused. This is the background, the backdrop of this thing, and where the local government have to change their real estate focused business to a new type of economy, including high technologies as well. So you understand actually Bitcoin and other tokens is just the reflection of the utility functions of the reflection or media of the blockchain area. And the fundamental thing is the technology itself. So that's why you can see the Bitcoin Cash and other flaws in the core. It's called core, and also the miners, as well as the probably from the Main Street, the index, and the Wall Street guys. And from government perspective, the central government, they themselves would like to develop this digital currency as well, just like US dollar or RMB or Japanese yen. Everyone would like to have their currencies that's very to provide to have the functionality, the feature, or the nature of the currency, right? But the local government would like to have their economy grow. Would like to definitely try to boost their local economy. They face their pressure as well. So they would like to welcome. I do not know who here started your startup in the blockchain business. We definitely can help you guys to go to China to have a very good support there. But if you would like to raise an ICO there, it is definitely bad. and also because of the crowd, Chinese population is huge. The government do not want to say everyone who, especially not the institutional investors, the individual investor, they definitely do not have that much background knowledge about how to invest. And later on, just a P2P investment in China. After a surge of the P2P companies got success, but a lot of them actually they have just like Ponzi scheme. That's another reason for that. Thank you.
Can I add something to that? So, just in simple terms, the central government is there to create laws and enforce laws, but the local government, their interests aren't necessarily aligned with the central government. So their interest, as you said, is really in their economy, but also the local politicians are trying to advance their careers, and part of advancing their careers is to grow their economy. So they're interested where they can to support businesses, especially businesses like blockchain, that are growing very quickly and are going to rapidly increase in revenue, which of course is going to increase the taxes that are paid locally, and this will make the local politicians look good and move up in the party. The central government isn't concerned with those type of things.
Did anyone want to comment on the actual Sandbox Plan that the government is introducing? I mean, we're focusing later on some of the negative, but I would like to highlight the positive. RegTech Sandbox Plan. You mentioned it. Yeah, maybe you just elaborate on the Sandbox Plan.
Okay. I know that in Guizhou, because a friend of mine who is also running a association in blockchain business in Silicon Valley, actually it is sponsored by the local government of China, like Guizhou government as well, because of the Guizhou Gui province itself focusing on the big data. So later on, they try to explain the big data in the blockchain by this term, and they are doing their sandbox for the to try a little bit relaxing on the regulation side, and I want to just let some innovations in the blockchain, including the public chain and the private chain, to make some. To try their side from their side, but how about the future? Whether or not the regulation would get a total release, we do not know. We still would like to observe because the central government is still there. They have to listen to the central government for that.
Okay, thank you. So let's talk about the ban for a little while. On September 4th, the People's Bank of China, along with 6 other Chinese government administrations, issued a notice basically listing a variety of now prohibited activities. Isa, do you want to chat about it, or I can go on and explain all the details?
Yeah, sure. I can explain a little bit about that. As Alexandra mentioned, on September 4th, there are 7 government administrators comes out with a joint announcement saying ICO is an unregulated illegal way to raise funds, and all the funds raised through ICO, through the ICO platforms will need to be returned. So for about 1 month, all the ICO, about 65 or 60 ICO platforms exist in China. They return all the tokens and fiat they got from ICO, and they got the coins back and returned to the issuer. Actually, we got $2 million worth of Ether sold through the top one ICO platform called ICO-H. We got the announcement as well, and we returned Ether we received from that platform. So that, but actually days before the announcement, a lot of ICO platforms starting to stop doing ICO and start to negotiate with the government. But no one knew what would come out until it really came out.
So let me just list a translation of the following key statements from the ban. Number 1, token offerings are illegal regardless of which jurisdiction globally they were launched from, which is an important point here. And cryptocurrencies shall not be recognized as a currency nor circulated in the market. Number 2, no organization or individual shall be allowed to conduct any token offering for fundraising purposes. 3, supervision of coin financing platforms shall be enhanced. 4, financial institutions and non-bank institutions are prohibited from being involved in practices related to token offerings. 5, the general public shall be aware of the risks associated with token offerings. And finally, industry participants shall be self-regulated. So having said that, what's really going on behind the scenes? Elaine or Jeff, maybe you could talk a little bit about the context of this, because immediately after the notice was published, there were comments from within mainland China basically kind of taking a step back and saying, well, maybe it's not really a ban, maybe it's more like a suspension, and we still like the technology. What's really going on behind the scenes?
Yeah. I compare this to what was going on during the dot-com decade. I call it irrational exuberance. And the number of ICOs that were getting done in China and the way that the money was being raised, it was not really regulated. There was a lot of concern by the Chinese government about fraud. And I heard something this morning that sort of resonated with me, that this was really intended to bring order to the chaos, not chaos to the order. And it was to take a breather from what was going on, I think, until the party could meet in November and talk about this internally and really decide what they wanted to do. And I personally expect guidance to be coming out very shortly from the central government, and for the ban to be lifted and for the activity to begin, but under this new guidance.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing that we were invited to present on September 6th to Blockchain University of that a big event. And during the entire weekend, we had to change all the slides of our presentations because, back to September 4th, the news got published. And we were thinking, okay, what was the fundamental thing happened? What was the logic from the government perspective? And how this community would got reflected, and how could they move forward? But even from our previous experience in the P2P lending, still, the guys from Lending Club, the co-founder, they co-founded Dianrong in China, and probably in the future they are going to do the IPO as well. And I spoke with the co-founder. Here in New York City, we were thinking for this ICO, the regulation is the highest type kind of regulation, because just no one can do that. No one, definitely no one. So as Jeff just mentioned, we still have to monitor what will be the future, but also that's our that can help us to do some business here in New York City, under the regulation here, but to probably help people like in this blockchain community to come here, to figure out something, but still waiting for the news from China regulation.
So what Jeff was referring to is the 19th National Congress of the Communist Party of China, which ended October 24th, I believe. And there was a lot of hope that they would come out with some statements about the temporary ban being lifted or new regulations being introduced. And we haven't heard anything yet as of Friday. But what's interesting is that there are some platforms such as ZB.com, which has already announced, based in China actually, it's a cryptocurrency trading platform, that they will be trading as of November 1st. So they're kind of anticipating something changing, but I guess the general consensus is nothing has really changed, and just continue to be cautious. So then what are the consequences of actually violating the ban? I mean, there were some very serious criminal sanctions suggested in the notice. Does anyone want to comment on what does that mean for perhaps startups in the room who are still thinking, well, let me just continue marketing my token sale in China, or figure out a way to help local investors move to Hong Kong, where the ban, we believe, is not likely to be an issue. Does anyone have a comment on that?
Well, I'm not an expert on Chinese law, but I think we can take some information from the notice itself and the way it's structured and the information contained in it to touch upon this subject a little bit. Alexandra, you mentioned a bullet point list of items mentioned in the notice. Obviously, the first few bullet points were the ban itself, the nature of the ban, the extent of it, the scope. But the last point said, in essence, we expect the industry to be self-regulating. In other words, we expect the exchanges, all the firms offering ICOs, everybody involved in blockchain technology to do their fair share of lifting the burden of regulating the industry. And I think that is a message that was sent intentionally. I think it puts the industry on notice, and I think it puts the entire industry globally on notice. I think the first bullet point you mentioned that no ICO in any jurisdiction will be permitted in China, and so that seems to go beyond the borders of China. And I would expect that any enforcement actions by the central government or any other governing authority in China would use that notice as the framework for its enforcement action.
Yeah, I guess I would just also add that the deterrent effect in China when the government comes out and says something is a lot higher than it is here. And the fear factor is much greater. So being quite diplomatic, but I think that the reality is that the government, even though that fear factor is higher, they don't have the manpower to really enforce it. So absent something quite egregious or to set an example to increase the fear factor, I don't think it's going to be more than that.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, I think one of the sanctions mentioned was life in prison, so yeah. I'm afraid, yeah. If I was in China. Okay, great. So then what, perhaps Isa and Elaine, you can comment about what are Chinese companies, entrepreneurs, investors, and others actually doing in terms of investing continuously in tokens, whether they're outside China or in mainland China?
Yeah, actually after the ban, everyone thought the ICO ban was really extreme, strict, and also after the ICO ban, most exchanges shut down, and everyone was trying to sort out whatever coins they have, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the price got to all-time low, like around this 3 months, but then it bounced back. And it seems some authorities came out and saying ICO might be a good way for tech startups to raise funds, which they were not able to through the traditional ACA way. It was very time, cost, not efficient. So then people started to invest in ICOs again. And actually, most of the foreign ICOs, they exclude Chinese investors. But the Chinese investors, they all figure out alternative way to continue their investment. And I got approached by a lot of ICOs like this 2 months, like thinking about raising money from Chinese investors, but not like officially raise money to Chinese market. And also, I have a community of about 2,000 crypto enthusiasts, and they do investments, they do crypto trading, a lot of day traders full time. They are still very now like about half a month after the ban when it comes back. They are now like investing again, trading again. So I believe lots of the Chinese investors, they think the ban from the government was just a method for the government to kick out non-government players and come into this very profitable business themselves.
Let's do another one.
Battery. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we run a meetup. It's called Chinese Blockchain Investors. But we definitely do not want to get us in the trouble of the certain regulations here in US nor in China. Because our perspective from VC's perspective, so definitely we would like to show the best of the best blockchain startups. But as regarding the fundraising, they definitely can do the private investment as well. And also, you guys probably have already known like Sequoia and Zonvon Ventures or A16Z and Team Draper. They all got involved in the either way, like SAO or pre-SAO or other, like just like SAFE in our seed investment as well. So definitely there are a lot of different ways to invest for Chinese investors, and that's why we are here. We see in just like Internet 3.0 type of thing, it's a growing economy and a community. If we see this investment from this perspective, this is definitely not a trading type of investment. This is the contribution investment. And if you are part of this community, eventually probably you can get a pie, just like you invested in Google a decade ago.
I mean, I even know people are creating groups on WeChat and trading on WeChat. And I mean, that the level of activity when I was just in China, of people literally sitting around on WeChat and doing that has increased dramatically.
Yeah, actually we raised funds through WeChat. Yeah, because at that time there are not many PR firms doing all the fundraising for ICO, so I did it on myself. Yeah, so it was prior to ICO, we already filled over 80% from the whitelist, and the ICO, we got very few left. Yeah, so all the businesses are happening on WeChat now. Well, I forgot to mention, after the ban, a lot exchange, actually, they all register overseas. They have their overseas branch, and all the ICO, they started to register the company overseas, and by the look of the Chinese government, the ban.
Yeah, and I want to add on that because the social media definitely is monitored. So, if you do that, you need to do that carefully. And also there are some other ways to that as well, and Telegram as well, right? And WhatsApp and other, you do not need to really save your data to send your data to someone else.
Isa, you had mentioned earlier some of the consequences of the ban include other activities outside of China in other jurisdictions, like negatively, there was a similar ban introduced in South Korea, but positively, you see other countries like Japan and elsewhere that are kind of picking up the slack. Could you just respond to that?
Actually, after the China ICO ban, about half a month later in Korea, they are banning ICO as well. But I think in Korea it takes a longer period for them to pass it due to their system. But in Japan, and in other countries, our locations are Hong Kong, Singapore, they're kind of supporting the blockchain technology, they're supporting the crypto trading platforms. But for ICO, I don't think they are actively embracing as well, because we all know it's very money-making, very profitable business industry, and there are a lot of scams associated with that. So all the governments are very cautious about ICOs. I think globally the same.
So for our last question before we open this up to the audience, let's talk about the future. Where do you see the future of blockchain technology in China, or the future of tokens, cryptocurrency, exchanges in China? And what role do you think China will play in the future of blockchain globally? This is open to anyone.
Go ahead.
Well, actually, China government, as you mentioned, their sandbox set up. As far as I know, there are over 100 blockchain companies set up in Shenzhen, Shanghai, Free Trade Zone, and in Chongqing, they set up, the government helped set up a sandbox for blockchain companies, and a lot of blockchain companies moved to there, and also in Guizhou and Jiangsu, they all have like high-tech companies associated with blockchain, supported by the government set up there. So, and also rumors that the China government is going to issue national cryptocurrency. So I believe the China government, they definitely do not want to be left behind by other governments like Japan, like Great Britain, like Singapore, in this new coming out technology. And a lot of banks in China already started research about 3 years ago. So for me, I believe the China government, though they are banning ICO, they are shutting down the exchange. They are definitely trying to figure out a way to embrace this technology, as well as make Chinese people invest logically as well as safely. So that's my opinion. I think China wants to be a leader in this industry.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think China has a desire to change its reputation from being like a global imitator to a global innovator. And this opportunity is simply too big for them to stay on the sidelines for long.
We've been seeing reports about laws that reflect the exact same concept. There was a draft law circulated, I believe, last year, suggesting that China may enact some regulations or laws making digital items personal property, with all the rights that flow from personal property. There have been reports about the central bank or another authority issuing interim regulations as to the management of Bitcoin. by financial institutions. So it seems like there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes that suggests that blockchain technologies are going to play a very large role in China going forward.
Yeah, guys, interesting thing, for the AI world, there are more than 50% the talents from China. And similar way, in China, there is no lack of the talents in the technology side, including blockchain. If you think about the population of China, and there are a lot of people who are really a big fan of blockchain itself, how they can see themselves in the future in this business. So from the government side, they definitely do not want to, they want to create more jobs, right? So just like Jeff said, and they want to capture or lead this type of the Internet 3.0. They would provide the ways to do that. But from the financial perspective, think about the capital market. This is another thing, definitely another thing. From our previous regulations in the financial market in China, including fund of funds, including derivatives, including P2P, we see no much too quick move there. There have already been 20 years. So two different perspectives.
Well, I want to thank our panel and everyone for attending today. Thank you very much. Does anyone have a question for our panel? Yes.
I was hoping the panel could respond to a couple of things. One, there have been rumors out there that the Chinese government want to pick a couple of platforms and then have all the new projects be built off of those platforms. Neo, and I think one or two others as the core platforms, and then all these additional projects built off of those. Curious to know your thoughts, and also if anyone can predict on the panel when the exchanges will reopen. I think we'd all love to know what the panel thinks.
I was going to say, let me get on the crystal ball.
For the first one, I never heard of it. The government picked a couple of platforms to manage all the projects. Well, I never heard of it. I think it's a rumor, and there's no clear clues coming up yet. All are just people's guesses. So what's your second question?
I was wondering if the panel could give us their prediction on when exchanges will reopen.
I think as Alexandra mentioned, there was exchange called Rinde. They already opened for trading, and you can also put the Chinese yuan in.
Is that government sanctioned or are they just sort of off the reservations?
A lot of people thinking there is government involvement in that trading platform. Maybe someone from with government relations invest in that platform, so they have the license or license.
Yeah, I think to your question, there is historical precedent for the government controlling or having influence over businesses and then building around it. And I even though it may be rumor, I think you're probably right.
Yeah, I think for the government, their most concern is first to not let people going crazy. Being scared, and then they all came back to the government to ask for protection because of their crazy investment. And also, we all know there are a lot of scams involved in ICOs. Well, second, I think the government does not want to have Chinese yuan be on the side of the country. Does not want to have the outflow of the not Chinese US dollars, right? And third, I think the government will have control of where the money goes, control of the people's information and companies' information. So I think those are the Chinese government's biggest concerns. As long as these are assumed like safe for the government, they would allow more actions from different companies, organizations, and people.
Let me just add as my second disclaimer for the morning, nothing that you heard today should be taken as legal advice. We strongly suggest that you seek your own independent legal advice. Yes.
Hi, good morning. On Friday, I believe the Vice Finance Minister announced about allowing majority foreign ownership in financial services, securities firms, insurance companies, banks, funds. Historically, it's been 49-51. Now they're 49 being the foreign and 51 being China. How is that going to play out? And will that impact potentially ICOs in the future? So it's sort of the broad question and then a specific question.
Well, I think the overarching purpose for that change is a recognition by the Chinese government that they can't fund that industry on their own, and that there's a sufficient level of interest by foreigners to participate in the China market, which is a vast market, much larger than anywhere else in the world. Ultimately, those two issues will dovetail, but it's just a question of how.
Yes.
It's interesting you mentioned a lot of your blockchain investors on WeChat. In the US, I find most of them are in Telegram or Signal. Is Telegram Signal also okay in China, or is it banned?
Well, all the investors are very smart. They all have VPNs. And if you go on Telegram, we have Telegram channels for Moeda. Over 60-70% are Chinese. So even though the Telegram is banned in China, they all have their way to get onto the newest.
Do you find the big whales, the ones who own a lot of crypto coins, bitcoins and stuff, are mostly in Telegram or in WeChat?
I think they are everywhere, and yeah, you never know they're big whales.
Yeah, most of the whales in the US are in Telegram or Signal.
Yeah, I think a lot of whales they came out saying they are big holders of Bitcoin, no one can prove it, and also there are a lot of people who keep silent.
Right.
Yes.
Are there actually ICOs going on in China regardless of the fact that you have a ban?
You mean there are ICOs coming out in China regardless of the ban?
Yeah, are there?
No, I don't think so.
I do. It's being done very discreetly.
No, it's true. Through Telegram mostly.
Yeah.
Again, we urge you to see. Any other questions? Okay, yes.
I have one more. Sorry, a follow-up. So the Chinese government comes out and says that cryptocurrency should be self-regulated, but then they go and close all the exchanges simultaneously. I'm a supporter of Chinese involvement in blockchain, but I'm trying to take those two statements and wrap my head around it. Is it just ultimately that they didn't have ownership interest in the exchanges, and that's what drove all this? If you have insight, that would be great.
I think this touches on your earlier question, and there's a limited extent to which we can predict the future. But
this was for the past, though. This question.
I understand, right? But it does touch on the future as well. I mean, in my mind, doing those things at the same time suggests that further action will happen. It suggests that blockchain and all the technologies and businesses surrounding blockchain will continue to play a large role in China going forward. It's just that we don't know exactly how yet. We will receive, likely, further guidance from the central government and other authorities as to how they think it should take place.
As far as I know, by the way, today, I think it's still accurate that the large number of miners are still in China. So in theory, the Chinese could have cracked down completely and it didn't. So that should be some signal.
That's the paradox.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think you can also look at, again, some historical precedent, recent historical precedent. In August, the regulations, outbound M&A regulations changed. And a couple of major companies like Wanda and Angbang and Ping An, they had to unwind transactions that they were already in the middle of or had even completed. They had to unwind them. But it was a slap on the wrist. I mean, the reality is the government is very supportive of those businesses as long as they're acting rationally. When they start crossing over into irrational behavior, that's when the government steps in. And with these exchanges, the government has the ability to break or make a company very quickly. And so they can stop something, and as soon as they turn that spigot back on, those companies can be right back in business and quickly up to the same size that they were.
I have a broader question. The blockchain technology and the CLOs are challenges to regulators, not just in China, but in the US and in Europe. So do you expect they're going to have some in the future, some collaboration among the different governments in Europe and US? Because this is what your currency will flow everywhere globally.
So, I mean, I can comment on that. What's interesting is when the SEC came out with its report on the Dow this past summer, the Monetary Authority in Singapore came out with a statement nearly verbatim copying what the SEC had said. So that was interesting, especially given that Singapore had been a pretty popular destination for token sales up until that point. The Swiss have said that they are aware of what other regulators are doing. They are monitoring it closely, and word on the street, so to speak, is that they will be coming out with some new regulation as well. So I don't know that they are necessarily speaking to each other. I think obviously that would make things easier for the rest of us, but they are jurisdiction specific. I mean, notwithstanding what we expect from the SEC, they don't have jurisdiction outside the U.S. So. However, having said that, they are clearly a leader in regulations, and I mentioned this to others who are in the audience as well. The SEC has someone that I met who's the head of the SEC's enforcement group on digital ledger technology. And she is actually very supportive of blockchain, but made it very clear that while we support innovation in the US, it has to be done in compliance. We'll see how that's going to be translated. There have been some enforcement actions already and arrests made and so on. But the fact is that not just because I'm an attorney, but I think as a blockchain enthusiast, I think it's actually better for the rest of us who are legitimate players in the industry to have the industry mature and be recognized by regulatory authorities, whether it's in the US or elsewhere. I think that eventually, whether it's new regulation or just the application of existing regulation to this new industry, will happen in every major jurisdiction. Nate.
How do we bring, I run a US blockchain company, how do we bring our products to China, and how do we get the Chinese products here? We're innovating, but a lot of innovation is happening over here, and people are rebuilding the wheel.
Yes, I think naturally blockchain is a global technology. From its born from the DNA, right? So that's why we are here. We would like to collaborate from a different perspective of the best innovators and try to bring in the people who would like to contribute to your or others' product as well. Maybe investment, maybe not investment, that doesn't matter. And I would like to comment on the previous question as well. I was thinking about people's view of blockchain or the tokens. Probably it's a security, or it's a currency, or it is a good. That would be definitely very different from different countries, government, or from different regulations perspective. So,
Or even within the U.S., where we have different bodies saying it's different things. The IRS calls it a commodity, the SEC will say it can be a security, so there's still a little bit of work to be done.
But I think to your point, I mean, and I know you know this, but you have to understand what the ban is and what it isn't. And it's not like innovation in the blockchain space has stopped in China. right? And they have just as much interest as other countries in seeing it expand and succeed there.
Okay, well, thank you very much. If you have any other questions, you're welcome to stick around and ask our panelists. But thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at our next monthly blockchain breakfast, hopefully on the topic of Delaware and the new legislation that's been amended for blockchain. Thank you.